Greetings, everyone. On behalf of the Center for Community Progress, I'd like to welcome you to today's Cornerstone webinar. My name is Brian Larkin, and I serve here as the Director of the National Land Bank Network. Cornerstone is our webinar series, which equips participants with the building blocks to better understand and solve tough challenges, specifically those challenges that come up from vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties in our communities. For today's Cornerstone, we're really excited to have a dynamic group of leaders in the field of land banking coming to speak with us. We have individuals with experience from various portions of the country. And one thing that I am really excited about with this session is that recent work that we've done with the National Land Bank Network has shown that much of the work of land banking is occurring in over 2/3 of that work is occurring in urban centers and communities. A vast proportion of property that land banks have are in communities of color. And what we're excited to see is that emerging leadership in the field of land banking are becoming more reflective of the communities they serve. And so in today's discussion, we have the chance to hear from three dynamic leaders and really hear about the communities they serve and how their leadership is reflecting and helping serve those communities. As we get started, a few logistics about the webinar for today. If you have questions during the presentation, please click the stage tab on the right side here. If this is your first time using Hopin, there are different tabs along the right side of the screen. If you're in the stage tab and then select chat, we can see everything that's in that chat box there. Also, feel free to use that section just for interaction and communicating with peers to see who's all here and connect with others during the discussion. As you type questions as they come to your mind throughout there, our staff will be keeping an eye on that. And at the end portion of this, we really want to do a Q&A. Today's session is a little more informal than some of our, more discussion-based than some of our past cornerstones. So if you've had the chance to participate before, a lot of today is really going to be shaped by your questions and your feedback and your input. We're going to have a formal presentation, really introducing each of our speakers, allow them the chance to introduce themselves. And then from there, we'll have a panel-style discussion where I'll be providing questions, and then we'll really lead it off with the audience questions. So please utilize the chat on the right side there. Questions can be submitted at any point during the presentation, and we'll address them all at the end. Presentation slides and the recording of today's presentation will be emailed to all participants in the days following this webinar. I want to emphasize that. I know that's a big concern. Usually in a question that comes up, we will be sending everyone the slides, and we will be sending you a recording of this as well. If you experience any audio or video issues, one of the first steps of advice is to try closing out the browser you were in and rejoin the event via the link provided in your reminder email. If from there you're still having some challenges, please send an email to Julia Zimmerman, my colleague here at the Center for Community Progress. Her information is right there at the bottom, jzimmerman@communityprogress.org. And from there, we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm really excited today for our discussion. And I think you all will be really beneficial to hear each of these exciting stories and how their communities are represented. So first up, I'll call up Terica. And you're on mute, Terica.
Okay. Sorry.
All right. All yours.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Terica Bashir, and I'm very excited to be a part of this panel. I'm honored to serve on it and highlighting the work of leaders of color in land banking. And although the title does not make mention of this, I would be remiss if I did not point out that we are all women leaders of color. So I definitely appreciate CCP for this opportunity and the love to the lady leaders of color. So as we go to the next slide, or this one you have pulled up, I'll give a brief overview of our organization. So the Metro Atlanta Land Bank actually celebrated 30 years this year. So we are the fourth oldest land bank in the nation. Over the last 4 years or so, we have made significant changes in terms of our staffing, operations, and beefing up our programming. In 2019, we began working with the consulting firm to help us update our strategic plan. And what you see before you is the first page of that strategic articulation map, which actually is a 4-page kind of booklet that lays out our short and long-term goals. And in the dark blue, you see our purpose as per the Georgia Land Bank Act and other legal documents like our interlocal agreements. And in the lighter blue section are primary and secondary data points, which assist us in better articulating the impact that we're making in supporting the efforts to create vibrant communities, market and affordable housing, and economic opportunities. And as we were thinking through our short and long term goals, it led us down the path of renaming the land bank. In the bottom right corner is our previous logo and name, which was the Fulton County City of Atlanta Land Bank Authority, Inc. And we simply used the logos of the 2 municipalities that we served for our logo, which left a lot to be desired. So in the top right is our current name and logo. It succinctly says who we are, what we do, and then there's a little razzle dazzle of color with the stylized kind of M and A in the orange, blue, and green. We also did a brand refresh, which included a completely new website where we update those primary and secondary data points that I discussed. We also created new social media channels to share our big and small wins. We hosted monthly Lunch and Learn webinar series, and our executive director socialized the strategic articulation map with the elected leadership of the city and county we currently serve, which is Fulton County and the city of Atlanta, as well as those in neighboring municipalities that we could serve. And on the next slide is our small but mighty staff. So this is the team that does the work to make the dream work. We have about 150 properties in our portfolio currently. By the end of this year, we will acquire another 50 single-family lots from the City of Atlanta's Demo Lien foreclosure program. And then we have a new land banking partner that's coming on board potentially at the end of this year, and they plan to bank about 80 parcels, which would bring our total inventory to 280. And then next year, our inventory number could grow to as many as 440, as there are about 160 parcels in the pipeline from our sheriff marshal deed inventory, where the Fulton County and the city conveyed their interest in these properties to us, and we're working to secure funding to convert them to fee simple ownership for affordable housing development. And the next slide, I believe they were going to share our contact information towards the end of today's panel, but I'm sharing at this time in case that does not happen. Please visit our website listed there at the bottom and review the webinars I mentioned and other resources to learn more about our programs, our policies, and our partners. And of course, feel free to reach out to me with any follow-up questions from today and learn more about us. And now I will turn it over to Krista.
Good morning and afternoon to everyone. I'm so happy and pleased and grateful to be here. My name is Krista Stoneham. I'm the CEO and president of the Houston Land Bank. And I wanted to first begin by introducing myself as a person and a professional. Definitely this session is about leadership, and it matters who's at the helm and who's helping to create that strategic vision and direction. I've been very grateful to serve in this role since January of this year. Prior to, I was with the city of Houston for eight years as in the mayor's office, in the planning department. And prior to that, I was in the city of Prairie View, which is a small college town that hosts the best HBCU in the world, Prairie View A&M University. And from there, I earned a bachelor's, master's in architecture, another one in community development. And I say all that not to say my resume, but to show really the transition of leadership of from the educational component of being an architect and then being a planner, moving into fundraising and facilitating of relationships. And what I really recognized throughout that transition really is the racism in real estate that was put in place for communities of color. And I adopted my own, I'll say, guiding principles and mission of how I choose to lead in these respective roles and spaces. Because regardless of my title, I still will represent myself as a leader to represent the communities that have been inequitably served. That I'm very intentional about that. And this is just showing a little bit about me and how I choose to incorporate my principles into the roles that I serve. On the next slide is speaking on how I serve in the Houston Land Bank. So our mission is to strategically acquire, dispose, and steward vacant, abandoned, and damaged properties. I also added an asterisk in terms of environmentally contaminated properties, because being the fourth largest city in the United States and the largest city in the United States that does not have zoning, and not saying that zoning is perfect, but there have been some additional injustices that have been put in place in the communities that we serve when it comes to environmental protections, especially also being an oil and gas city. Right now, in terms of our impact, we are mostly in the housing space. That's where we began in 1999 as a program called LAURA, which stood for the Land Assemblage Redevelopment Authority. And then we rebranched in 2018 as the Houston Land Bank as a separate entity that is still supported by the city of Houston. But in terms of our powers and authority, we can comprehensively address community development solutions, as shown on the slide, in terms of economic development and food desert solutions, et cetera. We are piloting some things in economic development, but on the next slide, it shows really the impact that we've made over the years since 99. We've been able to reactivate over $96 million worth of property in various communities and neighborhoods throughout our city. All of those neighborhoods are low to moderate income. I choose to refer to them as communities of opportunity. And we also have provided over $5 million worth of subsidies to our builders and developers that we serve since we relaunched our programming in 2019. And we also are intentional in terms of being an ecosystem of impact and serving small minority women businesses in terms of our vendors and contracting opportunities. I'm really excited to share more about what we're going to be doing, but I will defer and pass the mic on to Stephanie.
Thank you, Krista, and thank you so much for having me here today. It is definitely an honor to be a part of a panel, as Terica said at the start, with not only leaders of color, but 3 women leaders of color. So it's definitely an honor to be here. So again, I'm Stephanie Quick. I am the COO at Intend Indiana. At Intend, we focus on comprehensive community development, where we focus on 4 primary initiatives related to innovative financing and development solutions, affordable housing, neighborhood revitalization, and fostering small business development. Next slide. So our 4 initiatives include 2 community development financial institutions. The first one, known as Built Fund, is the first CDFI, and Built Fund focuses on small business lending. So of course, being a CDFI, it gives us that ability to provide that affordable, flexible credit to those small businesses who cannot walk into your traditional bank and receive lending for whatever reason. So we are there to assist them with getting credit started, assisting with capital to advance their small business forward. Then our second CDFI is known as Edge Fund. Edge Fund focuses on affordable housing lending. And through that, we provide again, flexible single-family mortgages for the purpose of low to moderate income home ownership. We also focus on multifamily lending, which assists with bridge funding, bridge loans for primarily low-income housing tax credit developments. And then we also have a focus related to refinance mortgages in an attempt to stabilize communities and keep homeowners in their homes. Last but not least is the Renew Land Bank. And at this point, I just want to step back just a little bit in regards to Intend Indiana. At the top of the call, Terica mentioned that they've recently gone through a rebrand and a name change. Very so much the case for Intend Indiana as well. Intend Indiana, we originated in 1987. Starting out as King Park Development Corporation. In early 2020, we merged with what was then known as the Renew Indianapolis Land Bank. Of course, the land bank focused primarily on land bank activities here in Indianapolis. We decided to merge to bring the strengths of the two organizations together. Again, Intend having a focus on small business lending and affordable housing, including what's our fourth initiative known as Affordable Home Matters, which focuses on housing development, where we do our own rehabs and new construction for the purpose of affordable home ownership. Then again, Renew Indianapolis Land Bank, focusing on the land bank. As a part of that, we changed our name to Renew Indianapolis Land Bank. We took on that. Renew Indianapolis, taking on the land bank name. What we found, however, was many stakeholders, many in our community, they were not fully aware of our other three initiatives. So we took a survey of the community, of our stakeholders, and said, okay, it's probably time for a rebrand so that we can bring forward the four main initiatives and take some of the spotlight off of the parent company name. So with that, in June of this year, we went through a rebrand and changed our name to Intend Indiana, specifically for that purpose. Next slide. So just a little bit about the land bank, the topic of discussion for today. Renew at that time, now Intend, took over the land bank, took over the management of the land bank for the city of Indianapolis in 2016. So since that time, we have sold just over 1,000 properties through the land bank. Total investment to date has been just over $126 million, with 33% of those land bank sales going to nonprofits here in the community. In 2023, we anticipate an inventory of about 80 lots and dwellings. This is definitely a reduction in the number of land bank properties through the years, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on in the session. But right now, we've actually paused land bank sales here in Indianapolis as we gear up for the next round of inventory, and also put in place some priorities related to policies and procedures. Next slide. Again, I'm Stephanie Quick, COO here at Intend. This is my contact information, and looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
All right. So thank you all for providing that context and background. And as was mentioned throughout, we'll share the contact information of all the speakers today, in addition to the slides, as well as the recording of this session. So as we jump into the conversation, three areas are really interesting to me, and I hope that we can provide you some space and opportunity to just speak on them. I'm interested in hearing about the communities that you serve, so the unique nature of the communities that your land banks are positioned in and what that community is like, how you reflect that community, how you're able to show up and develop strategies and solutions for those communities, the organizations in which you work for, which you really laid out in your opening. And then really what I think is unique to this session from many of our others, you as an individual, your career journey, how you've got here in this space. Terica and Stephanie, as you mentioned as well, in addition to being leaders of color, you're women leaders of color, and what that looks like, what your leadership looks like, and how you show up, and how that leadership has helped to improve your organization to make a greater impact on your community. And so I'll kick off with the first community question, think about the communities that you serve, and what is the primary challenge that your organization is really trying to tackle through the work of your organization? And I'll open up to whoever would like to jump on first.
I'll jump in there. Thank you, Brian. The primary challenge for us here in Indianapolis at Intend Indiana is really the definition of a land bank, and that's addressing vacant and blighted and distressed properties, returning those properties to productive use, but also doing that in an inclusive and transparent way so that it benefits the community.
Here in Atlanta, like most cities across the country, like Stephanie said, that of course is our mission, but we've kind of shifted focus to the issue of affordable housing. Atlanta's rent and housing prices are skyrocketing. Wages have remained relatively the same, and we have a housing stock shortage. So we are on the cusp, something in the middle of an affordable housing crisis. So our mayor, Andre Dickens, committed to preserving or creating 20,000 units of affordable housing in the next 8 years. And started the Affordable Housing Strike Force, of which the Metro Atlanta Land Bank is a part of. And we are the city's designee for the conveyance of their surplus property for the development of affordable housing. And we're also, um, land banking as a tool. We have a lot of flexibility in the way that we operate in our policies and procedures, but we've also as a part of the strike force, are committing to creating more affordable units. So all of the properties that we have ownership over will be putting affordability restrictions when we sell and convey those as well.
And in terms of Houston, we have only focused on affordable housing since inception. So in terms of the communities we serve, that has been consistent across the board. But I will say, to Stephanie and Terica's point in terms of being inclusive, that is also something recently that we're a little shifting into in terms of bringing the community's voice in as a part of our process. And we actually amended part of our scoring criteria in terms of allocating a percentage of those points to the community so they can be a part of the change that we're helping to spearhead.
Thank you for that. And I think it's really helpful to hear about your stories in different parts of the country as you're tackling the same issue and challenges, but working in different markets and with different conditions, what that looks like on the ground, from the involvement from municipality and government to working with nonprofit partners across the field. And so those are really interesting examples to hear. And I hope the individuals in the audience are able to see kind of the different ways that land banks show up in their communities. And so thinking about the communities you serve, and so not necessarily getting down to census percentages, but tell us a little bit about those communities you serve and what they look like. Are, for instance, in all of your communities, are most of your properties located in specific neighborhoods? Is it spread evenly throughout? Are you seeing mostly the properties are in single family areas or multifamily, or what are the demographics, kind of different communities? So tell us a little bit about what the communities look like where your properties are typically located. Crystal, we'll start with you on this one and work around.
Sure, definitely. I refer to Houston as almost like a beautiful random, because since there is no real consistency to show, one community is more of, now definitely we have neighborhoods that are more affluent than others, of course. But for example, one of the neighborhoods is referred to Acres Home, which at one point, depending on who you ask, it was the largest Black settlement in the South. And it was given to Black families because they weren't allowed to live in the city limits. Hence, it's called Acres Home, because they were given an acre for their homestead. And that area was very self-sufficient in terms of creating solutions for themselves because they had no city services. It's very rural. There was, of course, a lot of Black-owned businesses and such, but they still have their chickens and their horses and all of the rural characteristics of when they were feeding their families. And as opposed to some of the inner city neighborhoods that are more, I think, traditional urban redevelopment. So definitely it's a mix of character in terms of each of them having their own unique identity and history and pride. Definitely, of course, they're all LMI neighborhoods and they're all predominantly minority neighborhoods, but definitely they have so much just pride and joy in terms of being proud of where they're from. And bringing that voice into the process is really something that I'm really excited and proud to be a part of.
So Atlanta, it's almost a split at around 40% Black and white, and then we have like 8% Asian, 8% Latinx, 8% other. And that's quite a shift from about 20 years ago when Atlanta lovingly known as Wakanda now really was kind of like that, where we had 70% Black majority. And we have an interstate that runs um, horizontal called I-20, and the racial divide is pretty much along that interstate. It's kind of at a diagonal, but the majority of the more affluent white neighborhoods are north of I-20, and then the majority of the Black home ownership is south of I-20. And most of our property is in the historical areas of transition and disinvestment, which corresponds to the areas um, slightly north, but north of I-20, but all of below. So you can see what, as Krista talked about, and what we're, familiar with the remnants of redlining and, just the racial um, discrimination that we still see today when you read the headlines around the appraisal values and being significantly lower for those in the Black households. And so, when we did our branding and kind of thinking through our strategic plan, we did purposely put in to make sure that we have an equitable lens in the crafting of our programs and policies to try to, combat some of that.
So within Tend, Indiana, we, through our land bank, we serve Indianapolis, Marion County. So the population in Marion County is just under 1 million. 62% of that population is white, with about 41% being Black and brown, and about half of the population is female. For the county as a whole, 14% of the population is in poverty. The majority of the properties in the land bank fall in Center Township. Center Township, it has a population of about 150,000. Again, half the population is female, about 50% white, and about 41% Black and brown. About 25% of that population is in poverty. The majority of our properties, again, fall in Center Township. It has historically been disinvested. It's considered the inner city, and the properties in the land bank that have been historic to the land bank have pretty much fallen directly in line with the redlining that occurred, and to be very honest, that still occurs in Indianapolis. So yeah, that's pretty much the demographics of Indianapolis and the land bank.
Thank you guys for sharing that. And one thing that comes through pretty clearly in there is that the challenges of what I'm hearing from your answers is that the challenges of vacant, abandoned, deteriorated properties are not distributed evenly across communities. When I hear about the difference between the entire community you serve and the demographics of the areas where your properties are located, they seem very similar. So whether we're in Texas, Georgia, or the Midwest in Indiana, we're seeing a similarity in how the challenges of bad properties are showing up. And so that's why I think it's really important, and you'll see a lot of our work really calling out the need to be intentional about how our strategies are addressing this. And so really excited to hear that work. Tarek, I want to start with you on this next question because your organization has been around for the longest period of time. But really thinking about, given the work that you're doing, but also the surrounding community, you talked a little bit about it too in the changing demographics, but what changes have you observed either in how your organization has been able to show up, opportunities to work with property and pipelines? There's been a lot of changes in Atlanta from demographics and real estate market, and kind of how has that reflected the land bank and its work in the area? And I'll spread that question to you all as well afterwards on how has changes occurred in your communities impacted the way your organization has executed its work?
So you hit the nail on the head in terms of the housing market and how it's influencing our work. There's been a few things that have occurred in the last 5 years or so. We have the construction of the Beltline, this 22-mile loop that connects all of the parks and neighborhoods around Atlanta. And once that first kind of trail was built, then you saw a very significant increase in the housing values around that area. And so it has followed around the remaining loop. And then, of course, we've had different booms in industries such as film and entertainment. So Atlanta is now the Hollywood of the South. We have several Fortune 500 companies making their Atlanta home to its headquarters or operational hubs: Microsoft, Google, Visa, Airbnb. And so all of these things, of course, are driving people to either move into the city proper or move here from somewhere else. And then last month, a new magazine named Atlanta the #1 city to live. So, of course, all of these things have led to the significant price increase in the housing stock, as well as making Atlanta the #1 market for real estate investment. And so this has caused a shift in the last two mayoral administrations to really focus in on affordable housing. And although we have been around for 30 years, initially we were doing a lot of tax extinguishments and land banking. But as I mentioned earlier, we really are working a lot more closely with the city and the county in terms of being one of their premier designees for when they're activating their public land and earmarking it for affordable housing, and really being able to have a more intentional and inclusive conversations with people around the power that the land bank has, along with its tax extinguishment power. Here in Georgia, we're the only entity that can do that. We also have tax exempt status. And so being able to hold property for nonprofits who want to build affordable housing, and really that was part of our rebranding too, just really letting people know who we are and what we do and how we can really help to transform these neighborhoods. Because, you know, studio apartments are going for about 1,200, 1 or 2 bedroom apartments, 2 to 3,000. And then 90% of the apartments that are being built are Class A luxury. And then, as I mentioned, we have a shortage in housing stock. So we're really having to get creative as well in terms of creating more density with using accessory dwelling units and, you know, the tiny homes and things like that, as well as being intentional with the laws. The city of Atlanta did pass inclusionary zoning laws. So any projects that receive public funding, they're required to have a percentage of affordable units. And then, like I mentioned, the city also activating their public land use. So it's not just, you know, the nonprofits and the do-gooders of the world. Like, it's really an issue for us all that we need to combat, because, you know, a lot of people are also living check to check, and we're really just, you know, one big incident could have, you know, someone being unsheltered. And Atlanta also has a very large population of people experiencing homelessness. And I recently attended a conference, and they really put it into perspective that these are not two separate issues. Homelessness, people experiencing homelessness, people who are unsheltered, also an affordable housing problem. So, you know, it's a lot going on here, Brian.
So I think I'll echo some of the things that you just mentioned. Definitely in Indianapolis, we're seeing an increase in the interest in property acquisitions from out-of-state investors, as well as market rate developers when it comes to the real estate market in general, but definitely in regards to land bank properties. So with that, what happens is that with existing property owners or smaller community developers, community development corporations, buyers who may just want to purchase a land bank property for themselves for home ownership, it's becoming competitive, both again in the overall real estate market as well as through the land bank. With the land bank here in Indianapolis, again, we manage the land bank for the city of Indianapolis. I showed a few stats at the start of the presentation in regards to the number of properties that we've sold through the land bank. When the land bank was first initiated in 2016, there were literally hundreds of properties in the land bank, and the city's goal at that time was simply, okay, we have this problem. A number of these properties have been problem properties for years before the land bank was actually established, contributing to, of course, safety, crime, property values, and the whole list of things. So the goal for the land bank was simply that let's get them back on the tax rolls, let's get them back into productive use, no matter if it were for affordable housing, market rate housing, commercial development. Our land bank now is primarily residential properties, but when we first started, it was that it was not that focus. It was let's just do something to get values back up, get the properties back on the tax roll. So that happened. We did it. We got those properties out there, and there were no restrictions on who could buy. Any individual could purchase a property. Any developer could purchase a property. Anyone could purchase a property for the purpose of affordable housing. But there was not that until within the last couple of years, there was not that intentionality in regards to addressing affordable housing, or addressing and making it a priority for those who live in a particular community to be able to take advantage of the land bank properties. So with that, just a few years ago, we did implement an affordable housing component to our policies that allow nonprofit affordable housing developers priority in regards to purchasing properties, and also purchasing those properties at a reduced rate. We also prioritize, which we've always prioritized, home ownership in regards to the purchase of land bank properties. But again, it was not specific to home ownership for those with low to moderate incomes in regards to the land bank. It was just home ownership. So that's definitely some of the changes that we are seeing. And then, as I mentioned, we've put a pause on the sale of properties in the land bank at this time, as we continue to work with the city of Indianapolis to further those policies and those priorities, because, of course, just as literally all over the country, there is that affordable housing, the lack of affordable housing. The city is definitely now taking a look at that to determine how can the land bank properties best be used to serve the needs of affordable housing in this area.
And really quick, Krista, before you start, Stephanie, I just want to amplify that message. I think for those who are listening who work at land banks or in communities that have land banks, one of the things that's really, really important is your policies and your strategies. And as we mentioned earlier, each of these separate communities, we're seeing a lot of these same trends that are leading to these challenges. And if we continue just doing our transactions the same way they were before, we're going to perpetuate that with outside investors and other pieces. So being intentional about how we dispose of these properties towards aligning with our community goals is the greatest benefit of land banking and community. So excited to hear that transformation in the case of Indianapolis, and hopefully others who are listening are able to listen to that as well and see what type of strategy they're seeing in their communities. But Krista, how has change occurred in Houston?
Definitely, right now is real-time change, and I think everyone is starting to realize really what's going on the ground in Houston. I spoke a little bit about kind of having the haves and the have-nots in terms of Houston. So much so it has a name. It's called the Houston Arrow, where basically says regardless of the data, whether it's parks, it's housing, it's income levels, you will see a consistent arrow on the western side of the city, and everything else in terms of the north, the east, and the south, which are the communities of color, have been ignored. But since they've already built up and built out that area, now they're starting to trickle out into these areas and accelerating gentrification. Also, in terms of Houston becoming, I believe, more popular and well known, even though we don't necessarily have a signature anything, but definitely a lot of people have been moving here because it's the word is spreading that Houston is affordable. But according to a recent report, there's over 500,000 households who are paying more than 30% of their income right now. And I also saw something about our median income household right now is, I think, 410. So it is rapidly accelerating the more that people are moving here, and our communities are not able to keep up in terms of having that the home ownership, because I think most of them are renters. And I also think they need to most likely upskill in terms of the workforce component. So definitely right now, Houston is realizing what's going on in real time, because there's always been this perception that we're good, we're affordable, our families are fine. But now that they're seeing the data, and I think that they're also realizing, to Stephanie's point about the homelessness issue, is I think also the perception of it's not someone who's just panhandling sometimes. Definitely, I'm originally from California, from the Bay Area, and I firsthand saw how much Silicon Valley really impacted just regular everyday families who weren't prepared for that boom. And here in Houston, and we're creating an innovation district where really just moving forward into the creative industry. There's talks of video production, and rumors are saying we're a baby Atlanta. So definitely, even though everyone hasn't necessarily been considering affordable housing, I think they're realizing it's something that has to be considered whether you want to or not.
So in the discussion so far, we've had the chance to really talk about your organizations and the communities that you serve. And what I really want to end my formal questions on is you as individuals, who you are, how you show up in your work, whether that's the professional journey that has brought you here, the way in which you respond or reflect the community surround you, or some of those challenges. And so I have about two more questions that I want to ask, and then I want to open it up to the audience. And so audience members, please feel free to utilize the chat feature on the right side of the screen on the stage session. If you do the stage tab and provide your questions and comments in the chat, we'll try to save a little bit of time at the end to get to those. But speaking about your careers and how you end up in this space, can you tell us a little bit about how your journey led you into the space you're in now? And one thing that I always find so interesting is when I get the opportunity to speak to rooms of people who are working in land banks, I love to do this all the time, especially if I'm not in Atlanta or anywhere where it's kind of older in this space. But I say, raise your hand if when you were in school you wanted to work at a land bank. No one raises their hands. Most of the time, that didn't even exist in the communities that we're in. And in the 4 examples across the country where they did, it's pretty obscure. So with that being said, you started on some sort of journey, and what is it about your journey that brought you to this work, and how do you see an opportunity to really reflect your values in the work you're doing now? So Stephanie, we'll start with you with that one.
Absolutely. That is so funny. Brian, as we were just sitting here going through the presentation, I was thinking, I definitely never imagined that I would work or even be involved in a land bank. As you mentioned, had no idea that was even a thing. Way back in the day, what I thought I was going to be was an accountant. And then my counselor in college quickly said to me, you need to consider a different path, because that's not, being an accountant is not going to work for you. But at any rate, I never even thought that I would go down the path of community development. I actually started my, what I'll call my public servant career with the city of Indianapolis on the economic development side. And I honestly thought that economic development would be my lifelong career. I was really passionate about it and just saw myself doing that literally for the rest of my life. Nonetheless, I stayed in that field for about 10 years before moving to the other side, which is community development, and spent a little bit of time at the public housing agency, really focusing on rehabs and new construction and other affordable units for the city of Indianapolis. So not to completely go through my resume, but just to lead up to some things that I want to share here towards the end. After I spent about that 6 years with the public housing agency, there was at that point that I joined Intend, which, as I mentioned at that time, was known as King Park Development Corporation, as its director of real estate development. And then from there, again, we merged, and with the merger came the land bank. What I will say is that I've always had a passion for both community development and economic development. The work I've done, it's always allowed me to give back to the exact community that I was born and raised in, and that's what keeps me passionate about it. That's what keeps me in it, is knowing that as I was growing up, me and my family, we lived in subsidized housing, which was often substandard housing. So I knew firsthand what it was like to experience less than quality housing conditions. My parents never owned a home while I was growing up. So I didn't experience, in the majority of the community, the majority of my friends and family didn't have that experience to learn about home ownership, wealth building, generational wealth. So again, that's what keeps me in it, knowing that I'm playing a role in the positions that I've held to address quality, affordable housing and wealth building opportunities, and to be able to share that with my community, to be able to share that with my family, so that they then can share it with their family and their friends, and we just keep the cycle going.
I don't mind jumping in next. So definitely real estate development wasn't something that I had foresaw for my life, even though I kind of grew up in it indirectly because my grandfather, who moved from Texas to California and created the family and homestead, bought a whole bunch of real estate properties throughout the Bay Area, and some of the family still maintains. And after he passed, when I was, I think, about 10 or so, my grandmother, who I'm grateful to still have, really took on in terms of the property management side. So I've always kind of been indirectly around real estate development and affordable housing. But my love and passion actually started with fashion. And then that transferred into architecture in terms of expression, and just making sure that I'm being authentic in terms of who I serve. And I think just as I started walking into that public service role at a young age, when I was still in college and grad school, is really when I realized that there weren't that many people that looked like me when we were creating these solutions. There weren't enough women at the table. There really just wasn't enough representation and inclusive solutions. And even when I transferred into the city of Houston and more of the regulation side, once again, it was just representation and authenticity, and being brave and speaking up about some of the policies that were being implemented that were really biases. So really, it was more of really a calling than a career path. Even though I want to say it was linear, it really all connected in terms of the different roles that I've had over time, and how I choose to show up now in these spaces. Definitely, I like to say that my superpower is being underestimated. Definitely, I know that some people tend to maybe raise an eyebrow when I walk in the room, just because of the way I choose to show up and present myself as Krista first, and then Krista, the CEO, second. So definitely the journey from planner to president has been very divinely ordained and timed, and definitely steps forward. I'm very grateful to have a great safe space and support system around me here in Houston, and definitely with the support of the Center for Community Progress and other leaders of color and women of color that I have met, but seeking to connect more with, as we choose to collectively create more solutions for the communities that we serve.
Nice. Yes, surprise, surprise, I too had never heard of a land bank. I have worked in all three sectors, in the private sector, consumer relations and special events, and then nonprofit fundraising for LGBTQs, environmental rights, and then immediately prior to joining the land bank, like Stephanie and Krista, I worked for the city. So I worked for the city of Atlanta for about 10 years. I started in city council, then worked in code enforcement for a few years, and then in the mayor's office of innovation and performance. And our office was pretty much like the in-house consultants for the mayor. So we worked on identifying bottlenecks within processes and working on process improvements, specialty projects that belong specifically to the mayor, and then interdepartmental and cross agency projects as well. And so, since I had worked in code enforcement, that department was, of course, part of my portfolio of departments within the mayor's office. And then I actually ended up working on, identifying a bottleneck within the code enforcement legal proceedings. So it was a strictly criminal process where we're going after the property owner, which resulted in failure to appears, and all the while the property is still sitting dilapidated and being a hazard and an eyesore to the community. And so we worked to change the law to allow for a civil process, which you go after the property. So the code enforcement could put liens against the property for the remediation leading up to demolition. And so part of that administrative process was finding out who would hold those properties once those liens were foreclosed upon, and the land bank was identified as the designee. And so now it's like a full circle moment. It has kind of been a linear progression from working in code enforcement and then working on the law, and then now being in the land bank, and actually, like, as we speak, the properties from the foreclosures of the law that I helped to change is coming into the land bank. And so it's been really interesting that it all like worked out. As Krista said, it was like the steps were order my steps. So, but similarly as well, it's been very, very refreshing to be able to stay true to my passions in terms of human capital and social justice, and really investing in quality of life. And so even though I've been in different sectors and different departments and things like that, that's been a mainstay in the type of work that I do. And so it's been, really rewarding to be able to fully show up as myself and speak freely, whether it be, to the mayor around equitable projects around banking access, or, more specifically, like these are hazardous properties within our community, but always with the lens of, like I said, improving the quality of life for folks that look like me. Because we've been historically left out of not just the conversations or being at the table, but within the investments. And I mean, even as simple as, and it has a lot of potholes and things, but you can look at the condition of the sidewalks and things like that. And so it's just, putting all of that into practice to really improve, like I said, the quality of life for Black and brown folks, which really uplifts everybody.
Yes, it does.
Indeed. And I think it shows that a lot of this work is really systemic, and the only way to break some of these systemic challenges are to get to those who are receiving the worst brunt of the conditions. So we have a couple of questions from commenters, and so I'm going to pull those up on the screen and read through a few of them. The first one comes from Rick. And for these questions that come up, everyone, we can get one answer or, kind of a quick one. We've got about 5 minutes left. Want to get through at least two questions from the audience here. So this first one we have here is really talking about the piece of land speculators. How are they challenging with land banks? So in your perspective, in your work, each of you are working in different markets and have different ways in which you attract through your pipelines. Are they bidding up the price of land? Are you having to bid directly against speculators? Are you finding issues of hoarding, of challenged properties that speculators are holding on to, and are artificially reducing the amount of available land? So would anybody like to answer to Rick's question?
I'll take the first stab at that one, Brian. That's an excellent question. Actually, glad that it came up because I did want to address that. So yes, the answer is yes. Land speculators are making life difficult for land banks. In Indianapolis, there's not a bidding process for land bank properties. We set our prices based on comparable properties in the market. So, of course, with a land bank property, naturally, those are properties that are distressed. And as I talked about earlier, that's one of the changes that we've seen, is that those out-of-state investors, or even those local investors, are now very interested in Center Township, that township that holds the majority of our land bank properties, and they're actually buying properties before they can even get into the land bank. So they're actually purchasing those properties, which is one contributor to why the inventory for the land bank has dwindled some. But they're purchasing those distressed properties at prices that are well above what the assessed or even appraised value may be, just so that they can acquire the property and hold it. In many cases, hold it to see what's going to happen in the market. In other situations, they're purchasing those properties and they may be then renting those properties out for very astronomical prices, and then not properly maintaining those properties. So in the land bank, as we're pricing our properties, it does drive the cost up. And then we're seeing, even as we intend and we're doing our own housing development, we too are finding ourselves having to be very competitive with those investors who are simply speculating in regards to what the next hot spot might be.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. And given time, we have time for one more question, and I want to provide some context for this. Most of the time we're talking about land banks, we're really thinking about, hey, how do you get into a pipeline, particularly your tax foreclosed properties? How do you get that pipeline in there to help fix those up? But a lot of today's discussion has talked about as your markets are going to the other end. Krista and Terica specifically, you've stated the really increased desire for your communities to deal with affordability. So when you have the vehicle of a land bank, Joyce's question here is specifically about legislation, but I want to kind of open it up in general. How are land banks utilizing roles to help benefit affordable housing? When we look at their traditional role was, let's get these dilapidated properties through tax foreclosure, through this pipeline. But as your communities start to shift, how are you showing up in that role to really help aid your community's affordability efforts, whether it's ordinances, policies, legislations, or programs?
Here in Atlanta, we actually have very strong community development corporations that are committed to building affordable housing. So we do have a strong network of partners for development. What we're seeing because of the market shift is, we talk a lot about affordable housing and down payment assistance and things like that, which is on the front end, but it could only last for the year. Like, you put through that this is affordable housing and you must, stay owner occupied or rent it, but there aren't that many stipulations in terms of the length of time. So they could do that and then immediately flip, and then it goes to market and we're right back in the same situation. So here in Atlanta, we actually also have a partner that is a community land trust, and we are piloting a program with them right now for permanent affordable housing, because they have the model where they maintain ownership of the land using a 99-year ground lease, and then they either rent or sell the structure on that land in 5-year period. And so the homeowner is still able to obtain equity, but they still maintain the ownership of that underlying land, which creates the opportunity for permanent affordable housing. And so I think that that's really a great innovative program that really would work out much better if we had more than one land trust, because like I said, the market is ever shifting and these developers are coming in hot, well above asking prices. And so to that end, we're also looking to get a line of credit for acquisition funds. So we are at the table able to get the properties as well. And then, as Stephanie said, we also set our own pricing based on the market and then within the board approved pricing policies. And so then we can turn around and sell them for a lesser value to those developers for affordable housing development. So those are two of the top things that we're working on.
Well, thank you for that. And unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. I've really enjoyed this conversation so much. So Stephanie, Terica, and Krista, thank you so much for taking your time to share your professional journey, to speak about your organizations, and really just to uplift the voice of women of color and leadership across the country who are helping make a difference in our community. So thank you for your time, and thank you for the work that you guys are doing within your organizations. It's truly appreciated.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And to our audience members, this is our last cornerstone of 2022. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share with us and to listen to some of our stories. As we mentioned, the recordings and the slides will be shared with everyone following this. In the comments, you'll see there is a survey that we'd like to hear about your experience with this. If you see the comment left in the chat by Julia, if you please follow that link and share with the survey with us, let us know what your experience has been like. And this will conclude the end of our cornerstone. Thank you all for your time, and we look forward to connecting with you all next year in 2023.